Tonight, I'm excited to welcome Walter Pryor to celebrate the release of This Leaves Me Okay. Lucille Eldridge wrote to her grandson, Walter Pryor, weekly for nearly 30 years. His reflective memoir shares a perspective of the lesser-known rural Arkansas Black experience through his grandmother's story and the well-known civil rights struggles. Walter Pryor is a son of the South, the Black church, and a strong family unit of resilient, formidable women. His professional career has spanned a myriad of sectors in large and small law firms, the U.S. Department of Justice, Capitol Hill, and higher education. This Leaves Me Okay is his first book. Pryor will be in conversation with Dr. Julianne Malveaux. Malveaux is President Emerita of Bennett College for Women. She is an economist, author, and commentator whose writings have appeared in USA Today, Essence, Miss Magazine, and more. Please join me in welcoming Walter Pryor and Dr. Julianne Malveaux.
I suppose you're waiting on me to say something. We're waiting on Dr. Malveaux, and then we'll get started.
Hey, how you doing? Have they introduced you?
They do.
Well, I had to refresh my lips too. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. We are so delighted that you all are here to hear about this wonderful book, which just resonates with so much history and place. Remember that most of us, Black people, whether we, I proudly tell myself or tell everybody I'm a native San Franciscan. But if my mother were alive, she made her transition a couple years ago, she would say, via Mississippi, because she was from Mississippi, and she never let you forget it. And so there's so much about this book that's special because of that. But before I say anything else, let's just acknowledge Juneteenth. Yes. Can I get a shout out for Opal Lee? For Opal Lee. This is a Black woman who is 94 years old now, and who, for more than 20 years, pushed to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And whatever you say about President Biden, and I hope you say good things, because when people question his mental acuity, all you have to do is turn on the television and watch somebody else and their lack thereof. But in any case, one of the beautiful things he did certainly was to make Juneteenth a national holiday, and we're very grateful for that, grateful for the final recognition. And when I was a kid, I used to say, I don't celebrate Juneteenth because I'm not celebrating being late, because we learned 2.5 years later. But as I matured, I was like, oh, no, we have to celebrate this and let's just get over ourselves. But this is not my show. It is this wonderful man, Walter Pryor, who has this amazing book, and I'm just gonna stop prattling on and allow him to give a talk, and then he and I will engage in conversation, and then you all will have an opportunity to engage in conversation with us. So Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Malveaux, and thank you all for being here. 3 shout outs, and I made a point of making notes for myself so that I didn't forget. First, I'm really, really thrilled to be here at Politics and Prose, and I have to say, it's a Washington institution, and one of my favorite memories of Politics and Prose is that years and years ago, my daughter won an auction, a ticket to get one of the Harry Potter books at midnight when it was released. So we went to the Connecticut Avenue store and we waited outside until the doors opened to get the Harry Potter book. And so it's always held this very special place in my heart. And so the fact that they were excited and extended an invitation to celebrate Juneteenth with my book is really overwhelming. Secondly, being a young adult, new parent, young professional in DC in the early 2000s, it was impossible to turn on the television and not to see Dr. Julianne Malveaux commenting on the state of the economy, the state of any number of situations in Washington, D.C. So to have her here agreeing to do this conversation also is a bit surreal and overwhelming for me. So I'm really thrilled and grateful for her to do this. And then third, some of you I'm only seeing as I come out, but it is absolutely amazing to me that you've helped create, you're part of my extended family of friends and neighbors and colleagues who many I've not seen in several years. And so it's a mini reunion for me to have you all here supporting the book. So thank you as well for being here because it really means the world to me. I said to someone earlier, and if you follow any of my social media posts, I keep using the word surreal. And that really is how it feels to me because I think I started doing this book more so as a tribute to my grandmother than anything. And I didn't really think about what the next step would be in terms of the book doing well or even having talks or signings or anything like that. And so every now and then I'll say, well, yeah, I have to talk to the publicist. And then I stop and I go, who said that? Who's working with the publicist? But it's actually me. And I just can't believe it's all happening. So that the book seems to be doing well and gaining some momentum is really exciting. And you are helping make that so. So again, thank you very much for that. As opposed to doing much of a talk, I thought what I would do is I picked a chapter that really means a lot to me, and I will read that and we'll just jump right into the conversation. And I'm happy to go into greater detail as we go through the evening. I will say that the cover of the book, if you hadn't noticed, is actually a quilt. And this is a quilt that Mama Ceal made when my daughter was born. And I talk about it a little bit in the book, but when my daughter was born, she asked us, well, what do you want as a quilt? And we were very much into our pro-Africa, teach our children about our history, and our only requirement was that the colors be red, black, and green. And she was going to decide what pattern it would be, what quilt she would make, and she decided to make a fan quilt. And so I don't have the quilt with me tonight. I actually will have it Saturday, so there's another book event on Saturday, so if you really want to see the quilt in person, you're welcome to come to that. But the quilt really means a lot to me and to our family, and I love that it graces the cover of the book with a photo of her resting on it. But the chapter that I've chosen to read is also about her working on a quilt, and actually a fan quilt, similar to the one that's on the cover. So I will be reading, this is chapter 17. I won't do the entire chapter, so I'll read some excerpts from it, most of it, but I'll cut out a few bits so that it won't take quite so long. Lucille had learned that it hurt less if she didn't watch the car disappear out of sight when LaRuth left to return to Forest City. After a hug goodbye and a quick look to make sure she didn't miss her daughter's last wave so that she could return the gesture, Lucille gathered herself to go back to the Hordens to finish a couple of final Sunday tasks and see if they needed anything before going to her room. Dinner had ended a while ago, but there was enough leftovers in case anyone needed a snack before bedtime. On this particular Sunday, Lee and Della Horton were joined in their den by their son, Eugene, his wife, Marion, and their grandsons, John and Carl. Not unusual since their houses were less than 100 feet apart. The family was watching television, having seconds of the coconut cake that had been dessert. After declining to join them and ensuring there was nothing more she needed to do, Lucille waited, washed and dried the cake plate, and left for her room with her last slice of cake that she had wrapped in a piece of wax paper. She too would enjoy another piece of the successful attempt at trying a new recipe. Give me a second, I'm do better with these glasses on. Back in her room, she turned on the Memphis radio station that played gospel on Sunday evenings. A soloist was beginning the first verse of Precious Lord, Take My Hand, and she resumed piecing the quilt she had started the week before. Her room actually wasn't hers since she didn't own it, but it was hers in the sense that it represented a space that she alone occupied and controlled for all practical purposes. It was her bedroom, her living room, and her craft room. It also served as her prayer closet, her retreat from the demands of housekeeping and child-minding, her sanctuary for private reflection, all in an area that was smaller than the room where the Hortons were watching their Sunday evening shows. Without the least bit of envy, and fully aware of the differences between her room and the multiple large rooms in the Hortons' home, Lucille was genuinely grateful for the compact, contained space she called hers. It was just enough, and she could do all that she needed in it. Admittedly, it was more structurally sound than the house she had shared with Walter and Effie. The floorboards didn't creak every time she walked across them. Even better, she didn't worry about the smell of smoke from a potbelly stove or the annoyance of pests creeping into the various crevices. Except for the rare instance of a necessary repair, no one other than she and LaRuth or other family members whom she invited came into the space. The fan pattern on the quilt she was working on was simple, but it required a lot of attention as she operated her foot pedal sewing machine. She welcomed the tediousness of the work as she stitched the pieces of cloth together to make the individual squares that she ultimately brought together to make the quilt. She had seen some truly elaborate versions of this quilt with carefully coordinated and complementary fabric choices repeated neatly over and over such that each square was a mirror copy of the next, and the finished product looked store-bought. Those were for sure beautiful quilts, but she had chosen a different approach for this one she was making for herself, or maybe for LaRuth if she might want it. The fabrics that Lucille had selected were a combination of random pieces that she had left over from various sewing projects, a dress or curtain she had made, remnants she collected from other ladies at church who didn't quilt and who had no use for them, as well as material that she had purchased on trips to Forest City with Mrs. Della. To most people, the assortment represented a jumble of mixed-matched odds and ends that could not have much purpose. But Lucille loved taking the random textures and patterns and putting them together to create something useful, something beautiful. As she sewed, Lucille started humming along with the singer on the radio, the words floating through her consciousness. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. What looked like a confusion of cloth scraps and colors and patterns reminded Lucille of how confused and disordered her life felt sometimes. While she believed herself generally to be safe with the Hortons, she was still a Negro woman in a society that placed little value on her life, and among many white people who held an abiding dislike, if not hatred, for anyone who looked like her. It was not uncommon to hear of someone having been harassed or attacked for no apparent reason other than they were black. Everyone knew of Negroes who had had the misfortune of crossing paths with some white character who felt like taking out whatever angst that plagued them that day on the first person legally and socially unable to defend themselves without consequence. Desi Mae had told her about her neighbor's son who was almost beaten in front of the drugstore downtown because a white man believed that the boy had bumped into him intentionally. And the daughter of one of the ushers on her usher board had been followed by a group of white boys from another county until a car drove up and the boys turned around. But this was just the way things were. That was the regular disorder, the threat, and anxiety that black folks faced. I am tired. I am weak. I am worn. Through the storm, through the night. As she sewed, Lucille slowly realized, as she experienced occasionally, that she was feeling especially low and lonely. She considered but dismissed the idea that it was just the words of the song that had her feeling this way. Had they sung that at Walter's funeral? She couldn't remember. She was finding the music both depressing and comforting at the same time. As she continued working on the quilt, she wrinkled her brow. Although she could not remember them talking about it, she was sure Walter would have wanted to have at least one more baby, maybe two, if they could. It had taken them a while to have LaRuth. In her mind, she had already named their son Lil Walter. Not that she planned to let anyone call him that, even if they did name a boy Walter, but it had been her own private joke. She envisioned LaRuth as a very protective big sister and little mama to her brother, or sister, if that was how the Lord chose to bless them. Imagining all of the matching outfits that she could have made for them made the corners of her mouth turn up ever so slightly as her eyes simultaneously welled with tears that never fell. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. Usually she could keep at bay the deep ache and longing she felt for Walter, both the earnest boy who wasn't like the other boys in her grandparents' church, and the man who had won her heart and fathered her child. But this day, sitting there, thinking about seeing LaRuth leave, brought back the emptiness that she couldn't fill with her busyness or the gospel quartet singing on the radio or a moist slice of cake. Even as she tried to focus on the quilt and the music playing on the radio, she couldn't dismiss the lingering thought that she was now over 40 years old, living alone, and the widow of a good man whom she had given her love to and who inexplicably didn't come home alive from a night out with friends the way he had done on many times before. The needle she was using to finish by hand a small portion of one squares pricked her finger. She barely noticed it. In addition to being lost in her thoughts, her fingers had become calloused, an adaptation to protect her from the inevitable future pains that were to come with the more time she spent quilting, crafting beauty out of chaos. Perhaps in time her heart might do the same or take on some other form of evolution that might make her losses and sorrows easier to bear. For now, for tonight, the load of those woes seemed pretty heavy indeed. Still, the painless jab pulled her back to the work before her. Lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. Even as she continued to indulge her moments of melancholy, she couldn't help being pleased with how the quilt squares were coming along. Yes, ma'am, this was going to be one of her best quilts yet.
Walter, thank you. That was so rich. Poetry, actually, when you think about it, weaving in the words of Precious Lord with your imagination of what your grandmother's thoughts would be. You imagine her thoughts quite a bit. How close were you? She wrote you weekly, but how much time did you spend with her?
So I spent pretty much every summer with my grandma, not the entire summer, but we would always go and stay in Forest City with both Mama, who's mentioned in the Aunt Elizabeth, who's mentioned in the book, and with Mama Ceal. So we would always spend a week plus in Forest City, and she would always come to Pine Bluff for a period. And then we would visit during the year. So we almost always went Mother's Day. We'd go sometime, over the course of the winter, certainly Christmas. So I got to spend a good bit of time with her. I mean, we weren't in the same town, but I was with her a lot. Enough so that she really was my person. Everybody, you kind of have somebody in your family who's your person. She was my person, and I got to spend a great amount of time with her.
But you ascribe some thoughts to her that I cannot imagine a grandma sharing with her grandson. I'm lonely. I might have had another child. Mm-hmm. I'm melancholy. Where did those thoughts come from that you so excellently express in the book? So,
I knew, even starting the book, a lot of the major events in my grandmother's life. I mean, I knew, that my grandfather, who I'm named after, drowned when my mother was very small. I knew just before that, they had made the decision to send my grandmother to live with a relative because she had in her mind she wanted this child to go to college. Now, mind you, she had no model for this. No one in our family had done this. And I think she had seen this through the white family that she was working for. I knew all of these things, and it just, let me add this. After her death, I learned a lot additional things that I hadn't fully appreciated. For example, I didn't know that she had lost her mother when she was 4 and her little sister was 2. And they were sent to live with relatives who basically neglected them and didn't take good care of them. And that's one of the opening scenes in the book. And it just triggered this desire to know and to understand, as well as a puzzlement about her, because I didn't understand how she could go through the traumas that I had learned about and some that I knew about, and yet became the person that she was for me, who was gregarious, fun-loving, had an incredible sense of humor. She felt like she could do anything. She could cook, she could sew, she could needlepoint, she could cross stitch, she could crochet, she could knit, she gardened, she fished. She did all these Renaissance things, right? She loved wrestling. She taught me how to play cards.
You love wrestling.
She loved wrestling. And what was even more fun, of course we all believed it when we were really small, but as we got older and figured out, this was more fake, we could not convince her that this was fake. She was absolutely convinced that these people were really throwing each other on the mat in the ring. But that, too, was what made it fun about her. But what I couldn't understand was, how do you go through all of the things she went through to be that person? Had she been someone who was mean or closed or introverted, once you learn her story, you say, you know what, she's entitled. Her life has treated her this way, and it's fine. Leave her alone. And yet that was not the case. Everyone loved her. I mean, all of my friends, all of our extended family who met her, they loved her. They always wanted to come see her when she came to town. They always wanted to have her food. So I'm eventually going to get to answer your question. So all of this triggered this just deep desire to know and understand. And part of my effort was to try to talk to my mother. Well, my mother is not very expressive, not very communicative. It's just her way. And so what I figured out, when she thought I was interviewing her, she could remember nothing. But if I start reminiscing and I happen to say something and it triggers a memory for her, if I'm just really careful and I'm paying attention, then I'm kind of recording these things that she's telling me. And I just kind of put myself in their shoes and thought, what would I have thought if I had been this person? What would this have felt like? And so I had to imagine, what would my mother have thought as a small child being sent away? How? And recognizing the context for parenting in the South, in Black households, where you weren't explaining things to kids. Kids just did what they were told. Mm-hmm. So what do you do if you're a small child and you're being told this is for the best? And you can't really challenge that. You can't respond. You can't talk back. What does that breed in you, and how do you respond? How do you respond as a woman, and I didn't realize this in the process. My grandparents were married for about 5 or 6 years before they had my mother. And this wasn't a time or a people who were planning their pregnancies, which meant my grandmother either lost a number of children over the period of time, or she couldn't have children. So now imagine, she finally has my mother, this child she has wanted for years. She has this child. She absolutely loves this child. She wants to pour into this child the love that she didn't have from early on. Ultimately, she did. And then to make the decision, I need to sacrifice my relationship with her so that this child can have a much better life. What does that breed in you? And even if you're doing it for the right reasons, how do you not end up being resentful? Or what is your life like? So it just set me on this journey of really trying to imagine what could they have done. And the confirmation that I got from this, again, remember, my mother's not told me much of anything. When I got the first manuscript done, and I send it to my mom, and I'm waiting to hear what she says, and I find out later, I really just found this out like a few weeks ago. She said to me, I have to read a little bit and then I have to put it down because it was stirring up too much emotion for me and I couldn't just keep reading it. But when she finished it, she said to me, I don't know how you got in my head so. And I go, that's it, I did it. I was so thrilled and emotional for the moment that she felt this rang true for her. And that confirmation helped me feel that I probably came close in figuring out how my grandmother may have felt.
Fantastic. What about your other relatives? I wasn't going to ask you that, but I'm going to ask you now. What about your other relatives? I'm sure they've all read the book. What kind of feedback have you gotten? Anybody mad at you?
So, no, nobody's mad yet. One of the things, what was really interesting, as we were finishing, and maybe the book was about to come out, and I had gotten it advance, whatever, and I'd sent it to my sister. My sister said, are you sure Mama's okay with this? Because, there are things in there that are disclosed. I mean, I I don't find them embarrassing, and thankfully I wasn't thinking about that I was writing because I might have been more inhibited. But I was like, yeah, she read it. She said it was fine. And then I started going, oh, have I been too transparent? Have I said too much? Will she find this embarrassing? And I really started worrying about that. But my mother was like, no, I'm fine. I like the book. Other relatives, I think, are still in the process of reading and figuring it out. So maybe ask me in a month or two.
You know, the context of your grandmother's life, Southern, restricted, just an 8th grade education, exposed to all kind of virulent racism. And you seem to be relatively well-adjusted. I'm not. I mean, my folks are Southern, and I have issues. I own them. I won't tell you all about them, but I will own them. But you seem relatively well-adjusted. So just reflect on race today in terms of the challenges we're facing today. You get a continuum of, from Black people, a continuum of reactions. You have the Black people who, they don't say white or race, they do this. Which is what my grandmother used. For white folks, that means they don't want to say white, so they do this. Rub their hand for skin color. You have other Black people like me who say black, 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 as many times as I can in contexts that are both appropriate and inappropriate. And that's kind of the continuum. You have people who experience shame about enslavement and those who experience pride about what we came through. So just talk a bit about the state of race relations today, and both through your prism and then for that of your grandmother.
So if you've read the book, you know that there are chapters that are introduced with actual copies of her letters. And they introduce these kinds of essays or commentaries that maybe more explicitly create the dialogue between her life and my life. And so we talk about issues like colorism and how that may have looked for her and what it looked like for me, or what racism looked like for her as a maid in rural Arkansas and what it looks like for me in corporate America, or code switching, right? What did that look like for her and for me? I mean, I think clearly race is an issue in this country and continues to be an issue in this country. And she had to deal with it in her context. I have to deal with it in my context. She never talked to me much about race at all. It was very clear, though, it was clearly present. She was a Black maid in a white household. Now, we were very fortunate that the Horton family really was a very kind, probably progressive in many ways family. Now, I don't know them, I didn't know them well enough to say that they were, at the vanguard of race relations, but in terms of how they treated her, the respect they afforded her, the way that they treated my sister, me, my mother, it probably was significantly better than many families were at the time. And there's actually a part that I wrote in the book that my trips to her and being around them probably gave me a level of comfort with white people that a lot of people of my, at least in Forest City, and maybe in Pine Bluff, I'm not sure, a level of comfort that a lot of people didn't have. And so I don't know that I was hampered necessarily in terms of my interacting with them. Now, on the converse side of that, I lived in America and in the smog of racism. And so, it impacts, when I talk about colorism, why were all the girls I liked up until college light-skinned girls? Because that's what Madison Avenue and television was feeding me. Being lighter, staying out of the sun, don't get too dark. I mean, all those messages, whether they're explicit or not, is what is communicated in this greater society. And so I think it is important to acknowledge that, which our country seems to have a problem doing, and also confronting it in a way that helps move us forward. And so even if it's just my children and they touch somebody and someone else touches somebody, it's still progress. Maybe it's not at the rate and at the pace that we would like, but I think having more of these conversations is really important. As a tangent to that, I also think it's really important to acknowledge and celebrate our history and to find joy in that, particularly in this day and age where it seems to be under attack. Certainly, I feel that resistance itself is an act of joy. Being joyful is an act of resistance. And so part of the reason, as I was writing the book, I was hoping that other people would recognize they have heroes and sheroes in their own families. Not just Black families, but all families. I think everybody has their person in their family who was really pivotal and who helped make these kinds of decisions that sent the family down one direction as opposed to another. And so I think if all this does is get people to think a little bit more, or they get an insight or a window into what it was like for a Black child growing up in this country that they didn't have, then I will feel pleased at that.
Now, what parts, is there some place in the book where you just got stuck? You got annoyed with yourself? It was hard for you to write? You threw the pages on the floor? All that good stuff?
Yes, yes, and yes. So I'm not sure how many of you know, some of you I've talked to, I guess no reason for you to know. I wrote the book in a workshop. So when I first started the book, I took what I knew from my grandmother and I filled about 5 pages. And I was like, okay, now what? How does this become a book? What do I do with this? I really don't know what to do. And I reached out to a good friend of mine, Tasha Robertson, who's the editor of The Root. And she said, hold on, we'll talk. I know exactly what you need to do. And she's written a couple of books herself. She said, every book I've done, I've written in a workshop. And what I want to do is connect you to this person who runs my workshops, and he will help you get through this process. And the way the workshop works is I was in a group Wednesday nights with 4 other writers, and each week you submit 10 to 15 pages, and we all commented on each other's writing, and our workshop leader would comment on our writing. And you may spend several weeks working on one submission to get it to where you, they, he are pleased with it. You may come in one week and it's perfect and they say, keep going. Well, there were many weeks where I just could not be disciplined enough to write something. Or there would be weeks that I just couldn't get to a place that I could write something. I don't know why I was so blocked. And it was very difficult at times to keep going because, the self-doubt creeps in. Am I good enough? Am I writing well enough? Am I really growing? And early on, it was really hard. Like, my hardest lesson to learn was to show, not tell. I would say Lucille was very protective of her little sister. Walter, show me this. Don't tell me. Stop telling me. Show me. And that is what drove me into doing what you asked earlier around trying to get into her head of how would she feel, what would she do, what kinds of things, how might this be expressed? And so over time, it became easier. And there were periods where things would just flow out of me, and there were times where I'd have to work really hard. So the passage that I read tonight is one of the pieces that I'm really, really proud of because it almost felt spiritual in writing it. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where the idea came to weave that song throughout the passage. And there are times where, even though I've written it, I can read it, and if I say it out loud, it makes me tear up because somehow speaking it makes it more real and more present. And so it just, over time, it became easier, and I did more and more of it. And thankfully, we got a book out of it.
Well, congratulations, since I'm still working on mine. And the floor is riddled with pages that have been thrown. We are going to pivot to our audience, our amazing audience, and the Politics and Prose team will come to you if you have your hand up. And we're going to ask you, for the purposes of archiving, to speak into the mic, even if you think we hear you, because this is archival. So any questions or comments? Hands, please.
Coming your way. Excuse me.
Hey, Walter.
Hey, Jeff.
I'm very proud of you. This is fabulous. I remember when you told me you were starting the project. So grandmothers in particular can be pivotal figures in one's life. What would you say the central lesson that you took from this that you wanted to convey to your children was?
It's a wonderful question. I don't know if I thought about it in terms of wanting to convey it to my children, but a theme that comes through this is this kind of faith and optimism that she had in spite of the circumstances in which she found herself. And to bring that full circle, for her to live in the time that she lived, who has not seen a Barack Obama, who does not know that a civil rights movement is coming, does not have, a broad array of news outlets to support and inform her of all the progress that's taking place around the country. Still, she remained hopeful and optimistic about her life and about the life she wanted to create for her child. So much so that, in a lot of ways, I feel like it took more faith for her to feel optimistic than perhaps it does for me in this moment. To have seen a Barack Obama, to feel this kind of regression that's taking place, and to say, my God, are we actually going back? And so I do believe there is a significance in faith and almost an audacity, right? To be hopeful when there's so much around you suggesting that there isn't a reason to be hopeful. And so I do hope my children take at least that lesson, that regardless of how awful the situation seems, there's a reason to keep working, there's a reason to keep striving, if for no other reason than for yourself and for those around you and the people you love and for your own wellness and sustaining power. So I do hope that is a lesson that they take from it.
Thanks for your question, Jeff. Next question. There's a lady up here with her hand up.
Thank you so much. This book can also be read as a book about parenting. And you speak with such unabashed awe and love for your children. And I wonder if you'd speak a little, it comes through in the book. I really think you could read it on that level as a book about parenting, because one takes away so much from your vulnerability, from the questions you ask in the book about when to tell certain things. So I wonder if you just say a little about how your parenting evolved. And also, I really want to know what your daughter and son think of the book.
Thank you so much.
So let me do the last question first. In terms of what they think about the book, here lately as things happen, and I get a good review or something happens and I put it in the family group chat, oh my God, can you believe I got a great Kirkus review? Or I'll send something else, oh, so-and-so wants to do something. And finally, my son said to me one day, Dad, you're the only one who's surprised. And that just illustrates the level of support and encouragement that they gave me through this process. I say in the book that let me just say, I'm so happy. My wife, Juliette, just came in. We didn't think she was going to make it because there was a ground stoppage, and so I was not expecting to see her, so I'm really happy about that. Juliette said to me 20 years before I wrote the book, you need to write a book. And I said, Juliette, I'm not writing a book. I had such respect for writers and books that I was like, I may be a good editor. I don't know if I'm a good writer. And I just wouldn't do it. And periodically she'd revisit the topic, and I'd, of course, continue to be hard-headed and not do it. And finally, as COVID was happening and I knew that I had a corporate role that was ending, I said, you know what the heck, I'm going to start. And so I started working on this book. And it took a long time, but really it was Juliette who instilled this idea and envisioned it, and my children who kept me going when I had those moments of, this is crap, I hate it, I don't know if I can do this, who were like, yes, you can do this, keep going, Dad, keep doing it. So that's that. In terms of the parenting, again, I will give credit to my wife. I feel like I hit the jackpot in terms of spousing and co-parent, because so much of what we did intentionally around raising our children really was driven by her, and I followed her lead. And so much so that, I mean, you're right, I adore my kids. I absolutely love them in a way that most parents do, but the difference is I actually like them as adults, right? I feel like I would enjoy them even if they weren't my children, because they're such smart, accomplished, kind people. And kindness is so important from the standpoint, one, it's something that was important to my grandmother, but it was also something that we really tried to teach them as we were growing up. And the perfect opportunity we had to really test that lesson, when our daughter was going into 11th grade and our son was 6th grade, was about to go to 7th, but he did 6th again, we moved to Chicago and from DC. And I will tell you, my first thought was, how long do we have to be in Chicago before we can go back to DC? But anyway, they were dependent upon people being kind to them. And this story breaks my heart. When my daughter when her first few days of high school, she didn't know anybody. She only had a few friends, and so you wouldn't see those people every morning. And so as opposed to standing around looking like someone who didn't have friends, she would bathroom surf. And what that meant was she'd walk to a bathroom, she'd go in, she'd stay for a little while in a stall, and when she thought she was there long enough, she'd leave and she'd walk to another bathroom so that she looked purposeful, like she was doing something, but she was really hiding the fact that she had no friends, and it was taking a while. And I think that was the first time that they really were dependent upon the kindness of other people to help them, acclimate, get accustomed to where they were. And I think it really hit home for them the importance of being kind. And so I truly say they are very, very kind people. Actually, I write about it one of the things in the book. Our daughter is kind to the fault. I mean, she's the patron saint of broken-winged birds. She will attract them like magnets. And I joke in the book, we joke in the family that if you're in a restaurant and a waiter came and poured a pitcher of water over your head, her first reaction was, I wonder if he's okay. I wonder what's going on with him. Not that I'm sitting here soaking wet and I have the right to be very upset. So they're really great people. I attribute a great deal of that to my wife, and I think I played a supporting role.
Thank you. Let's just give a shout out to Miss Juliette. Juliette, stand up, please. Thank you for letting Walter grow and develop. Next question.
Walter, congratulations.
Thank you.
Speaking of kindness, I always found you to be one of the kindest colleagues in our prior shared work life so many years ago. So it's absolutely wonderful to see this come to fruition for you.
Thank you.
This probably weaves into the past two questions. Can you talk a little bit about the moment that you said to yourself, yes, this can be a book, or should be, or needs to be a book, and whether that same thought carried you through the writing process?
I think a lot of it was driven just by my desire to honor my grandmother. And I was so determined to do that I didn't have this concept of what would happen to this book later. I have some very good friends who are here that they're family. And they were supportive of me during this writing process. And so every summer we get together, they say, read us something else or tell us where you are in the book. And actually, I think it was the passage I read to you that I read to them at one point. And I finished, and I told you it was one of those passages that I would get emotional. So I'm finishing, and my eyes are kind of welling up. And I look up, and their eyes are kind of welling up too. And one of my friends, Tony, who's sitting next to me, he says, you have to keep writing. He said, you are writing for all of us. He's like, it's your grandmother, but you're telling my story too. And that was the first sense that I had an idea that the book could be more than just this tribute about my grandmother, and that it could have some greater impact. So there were lots of touch points along the way, and moments of confirmation to say, keep going, even when I was doubting myself.
And you are telling everybody's story. You know, in 1940, 70% of all black women were maids. 70%. It didn't matter, you know, the rest of us were teachers, nurses, or social workers. We didn't work in offices. We didn't get office jobs until the 1960s, the late 1960s at that. So when you talk about the Southern, we call them private household workers, maids, when you talk about them, you're telling my grandmother's story, my great-grandmother's story, the stories of probably half of the people, certainly half of the black folks in here. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. Next question, sir.
Walter, congratulations.
Thank you, Sam.
Proud of you, very proud of you. So now that you're an accomplished author, have you started to think about your next book?
It's interesting that you asked the question. Several people have asked the question, and I'm more focused on this one, although I haven't put the idea out of my head. And actually today, a very dear friend of mine and I were brainstorming about a possible book. Very, very different from this one, actually, but one that we think might have some legs. So I won't even tease you with what we're thinking, because it could change in any number of ways. But yes, in a kind of roundabout way, yes.
Next question. Anyone?
Walter, I would love it if you just say a little about your day job. And I say that because I think most people would not imagine that the level of creativity and compassion and vulnerability would be associated with a financial institution. And you're working for a place that wants to let people know that banks have hearts too. So.
Thank you, Jan. And let me just tell you this, it's not just her curiosity that motivated that question. I work for Southern Bancorp, which is a community development financial institution founded by then Governor Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, based upon their exposure to South Shore Bank in Chicago, which was designed to address the impacts of redlining and discrimination against black residents who didn't have banking services. Southern Bancorp, and Jan is one of the key primary people who helped bring this into fruition. I told her her new title is going to be Godmother of Southern. But Southern's focus is on and underbanked communities. Oh, sorry. Southern's focus is on and underbanked communities in the Mississippi Delta, Arkansas, Mississippi, which means it's primarily black and brown families, but also very rural, often white families. And my role, you would think I'm standing on the corner giving out money in terms of how happy I am to be working with them. I'm so far removed from the loans, the financial education, the tax preparation, any of it. But I serve as a general counsel and chief administrative officer, but I love that I work for a mission-driven organization that is having very real-time impact in communities that otherwise would not be served. And so it is a full circle moment for me to be working for people who my grandmother represents.
Another question or comment?
One of the things we haven't gotten to, and I just realized this, the other motivation for my writing this book, and some of you saw this and some of you hadn't seen this, or maybe you read it. My grandmother wrote me letters almost the entire time that we shared the planet. And one of my first and earliest memories is of my mother reading a letter to me and my sister on her bed that my grandmother had sent us. And that too led me to want to write this book because, again, she's a black maid in the rural South with only an 8th grade education. Why in the world would she decide she wants to write letters? And not just to me and my sister and my mother. She wrote all members of our family, including the people who had mistreated her as a child. And so Julianne and I sat down and tried to estimate at least how many letters she wrote me, forget everybody else. And we're convinced it was well over 1,000 letters over the course of her life that she wrote me. I mean, when you're writing weekly and also sending a birthday little note and something else for Christmas or whatever, it's just a lot of letters. And so I was really fortunate. Don't give me much credit at all, because so many of those letters were just tossed in the trash. But when I was in law school, I was sticking them in my desk drawer, not consciously saving them. But when I graduated, I probably had 3 or 4 dozen of her letters. Right now, I have 57 of her letters, and there are 14 that are represented in the book. So you can actually see her handwriting, her grammar, penmanship, all of that in the book. I'm happy to share that with you. But when I graduated and I had this cache of letters, it felt like something important. I didn't know what to do with it. And at that point, I wasn't even thinking a book. Juliette was thinking a book. I wasn't. But it just kind of meant something. And so to have that as a constant reminder of her commitment to keeping our family together, to demonstrating her love, it was a motivator, and it also added to this desire to know her better and to also share her story.
Walter, by my calculation, if it was 30 years, 50 letters, 1,500 letters is what you got. She might have missed a couple weeks or something like that, but basically, that's such a treasure trove, and so much intergenerational transmission. Do you write letters?
Not as frequently as I should. I try to every now and then sit down and write something, and usually it's not a letter, it's probably a card. Certainly if someone sends me something written, I want to write back. I feel like you can't respond to a written piece of mail or correspondence with an email or a text. So I do try to do that. But to your point about it being intergenerational, one of the most poignant aspects of this is that our last letter from her came 2 months before she died, and it was a letter to our daughter to wish her happy birthday.
Oh, nice.
It was her second birthday, so it was October of 1995, and she died December of 1995.
Wow. Folks, we have time for perhaps 1 or 2 more questions, depending on the length of the question. Going once, going twice. No questions? Oh, Chip. Hey, Chip.
Hey, what's up? I'll go ahead and ask a question. I grew up in Memphis, so also Southern Black raised. I got to ask you, man, no wrestling? How does that happen?
For me?
Yeah, how does that happen?
No wrestling for me. We used to watch it. But
Okay, I was going to say you watched it with your grandma.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there we go.
Absolutely. We absolutely watch wrestling. But here's a really interesting thing. It's so funny that you mentioned Memphis, because I discovered this, and I discovered it and then asked my mother about it. I don't know if any of you knew the concept of Maid's Day at the zoo, but in Memphis, and probably a lot of other places in the South, Black people could only go to the zoo on certain days of the week.
Right.
And if they were able to go during the week, they had to be with a white family. And so my mother actually got to go to the zoo on like a Tuesday or Wednesday during the week because she was with the white children that my grandmother was taking care of. And that always sticks in my head about Memphis, so it's funny that you raised that.
And that's why you can't forget that Washington was a southern town. So, the egg roll at the White House was not for Black people.
Yes.
They would do it 2 days afterward at the zoo. So,
Yes.
yeah. But, I had to ask about the wrestling. Because, before there was Obama, for us, there was, Bearcat Brown. So we had these heroes, a lot of them had to do with, boxing and wrestling and
Sure.
stuff.
Well, thank you for that.
Thanks, Chip. That's Chip Jones from WPFW. Sir,
There's one.
I think you're going to be the last one.
Well, thank you. I think it's amazing that you took the time and the effort. It reminds me of a story of Hillary going to a gas station and seeing her old boyfriend and Bill laughing and saying, if you had married him, you'd be here. And she said, no, if I married him, he'd be president. Everybody needs a Julianne in their life to write books. But the question is, my mom used to joke about doing day work. and her relatives in North Carolina and in South Carolina. And I love when she'd imitate the phone calls that would come in asking if they would do day work. I'm reminded this Juneteenth more so that people are saying that it should be celebrated by telling our stories. You mentioned, someone asked if you're going to write a book. You said you talked about something. So my question is, have you given thought to a children's book?
Great question.
I have not given thought to a children's book. I mean, I love the idea of that, and it actually seems much more digestible. But I don't know. That would be great. You just put an immediate picture in my head of a children's book and little brown faces and letters and all of that. So who knows?
It's a great
But
idea.
thank you for that.
And our young people need that history about the limited occupational choices that African American women had. Let's see. This lady is a timekeeper. I'm just sitting here.
We have time for like one more.
One more question. But one of the handwritten letters has a recipe for brownies in it. It says,
Well, you know, I actually have her handwritten recipe for the chocolate candies that I mentioned in the book. So and actually, you know, again, I tell you, Juliette's the brain in this outfit. One of her ideas has been to perhaps do a follow-up with either all the letters and recipes or something, or, you know, including some of her quilts and handiwork. So we'll think about it. We'll see.
I think we have a franchise on our hands. I love it. Okay, going once, going twice, last question. See, these people have to close. We stay here all day because I'm interested in talking to this man. When I talk to him, and I want to recognize one other person, Sue Goodwin, please stand up. Sue Goodwin produces my show, Malveaux, exclamation point, because I am exclamation point. And I always say that. She on WPFW, Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Sue, you're not going to stand up? She doesn't want to. Okay, I'm not going to push. I'm not going to push her. Juliette was kind enough to stand up. So, thank you for sharing that with me. And I know you know what that means. It's California for you know what. If you ever took EST or the landmarks form, thank you for sharing that with me as FAFO. But anyway, if there are no more questions, so they do have to close because here's what happens next. Y'all got to go buy books. There are some books up in here. This gentleman was kind enough to bring them. So now that means you have to buy them. So do you want to give them book purchasing instructions?
Yes, before I do that, can I give a round of applause for our guest tonight?
Thank you.